table.
Hi, welcome back to Making Action Happen with our wonderful Colorado Farm Bureau crew today. I'm Sarah Blackhurst.
And I'm Brian McCain.
Welcome back. We've met a few times before with Farm Bureau. Probably one of our most popular shows was with Sean Martini, who talked about wolf interjection. We're going to talk about that again today. We're also going to talk about meat in, meat out, and all the fun, interesting, sometimes entertaining things that have been happening there. And then in the second half of our show, we're going to talk a little bit about this new initiative, Initiative 16, that we're calling Pause. And I don't have very nice things to say about it, but we'll get into that in the second half of the show. Today, I've got joining us is the Executive VP for Colorado Farm Bureau, Mr. Chad Forthman. I've also got the Policy VP, Sean Martini, and Taylor Sal. I'm never going to say this right. 100 years later, I just don't even know how to say it right.
Salagi, it's a doozy.
Salagi. She's a good Italian girl. So we are just going to talk about a couple of those things, but we're really asking the question today, what does the future of ag in Colorado look like? And there's a whole lot. Every single day, it seems like there's something new that you guys are going to have to deal with. So Taylor, I want to start with you. Tell us a little bit about, especially for those of us, our listeners who live outside of Colorado, what happened with this whole meat in and meat out thing?
Sure, I'd love to. First of all, happy Ag Week to everybody.
Yay!
We're getting at the end of that and have a lot of celebrations this week. But to give you some background, a couple weeks ago at this point, we found out that the governor was going to proclaim March 20th as Meat Out Day, encouraging Coloradans not to eat meat. And he went on to quote some statistics that aren't accurate about the nutritional value and really fired up farmers and ranchers across the state, right? Ag is the second largest industry. We all know that meat is an important part of a balanced diet and is important to everybody's health. And all of a sudden, it sort of exploded, right? Colorado Farm Bureau, Colorado Cattlemen's Association, the Wool Growers Association, Colorado Pork, everybody started having these grassroots events pop up all over the state. And man, did Coloradans show up.
Yeah, they did.
So March 20th went from meat out to meat in, and we were encouraging everybody to go grill a burger. And Saturday was full of events. I think you all were in Pueblo County, and I was down in the San Luis Valley. Chad was out on the Western Slope traveling everywhere.
It was crazy because it wasn't, certainly in rural Colorado, it was a event, but there was people texting me pictures from around the nation. I was getting my hair cut yesterday, and the person that was cutting my hair was talking about how her friend was all about, like, we're going to eat meat and we're going to, smoke brisket and grill and barbecue on Saturday. And they were just so excited about it.
So what do you think? So first of all, for all of our veggie loving friends out there, they can't figure out what the big hullabaloo is about. So do you guys have any idea? Like, can you explain a little bit why? I mean, because honestly, veggies are a good part of and a vegan lifestyle is great for people who are good with that. We love it. We support you if you want to do that. But so what was the big deal? That's the big question we keep hearing. Yeah, let's hear.
Yeah, so I think this was different from other proclamations in that it promoted vegan and vegetarianism and taking meat out of your diet by tearing down the meat and livestock industry rather than building up the benefits of going vegan or vegetarian, right? Most proclamations are focused on being positive about the subject that they're talking about. In this case, it was less positive about vegetarianism and more negative about meat and livestock, and used a lot of like Taylor mentioned, bad statistics and fallacies about livestock industry's impact on the environment and sustainability and that sort of thing. And I think that's what really tripped people off, is it wasn't building up vegetarianism, it was tearing down the consumption of meat in the livestock industry generally.
And I think there's a trend in rural areas where they're a small percentage of the population. Politically, they don't feel like they're being heard. You have used the example of Northwest Colorado before, that you look up in Northwest Colorado, they're losing oil and gas.
Yeah.
They're losing energy production, traditional energy production from coal. Now we have wolves being reintroduced, and an attack on the ag economy. What do they have left? And that's when people start lashing out, when the only response that they feel like they're getting from government, from others, is retraining. Well, it's just not that simple, and people want their rural lifestyle to be protected and to be celebrated. That's what we're doing here during Ag Week, is we celebrate all of agriculture. We don't celebrate one part of it over the other.
So how does and maybe that's the real reason that everybody got so fired up about it, because it was more than attack on meat consumption. Like you said, it was really an attack on the way of life of people who are not vegan, and there's not, and what they do and what they stand for and what they've devoted their lives to. I think that's maybe the big thing that got everybody fired up. Do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also very much a conversation about what ag looks like in this state, right? And it's not just about the farmers and ranchers that are, growing cattle or sheep. It's also about ag business. And when you see some of the biggest agriculture businesses in the state start to think that maybe this isn't a friendly environment, I mean, that has a bigger impact than just what somebody's choosing to eat for dinner. So it was a good conversation, and it really fired people up, which was pretty incredible. There were, at my last count, before it was Saturday, there were over 115 events that we knew about scheduled. It was just crazy all over the state. It included restaurants that were doing promotions, come in and get a discount off of your meatballs, come grab a steak, come get a burger. It was pretty incredible. And some pretty massive impacts from it too. It was awesome.
So the governor sent out another proclamation for Monday, and it was meat producer. Was that right for Monday?
Livestock proud.
Oh, livestock proud on Monday. Do you think that isn't indicative of the message that was sent or the message was received by the governor?
I don't know. I think some of the livestock groups just said, well, we should have a day too. And the governor was like, okay, we'll do a proclamation.
We'll do another proclamation.
Yeah. Look, the governor's response to this whole thing was this is a box checking exercise. These requests come in, we look at it, we auto pen it, and it's pro forma, non-binding, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so that proclamation was in the pile with the rest of them. I think the difference with the Meat Out proclamation was that it was negative and exclusionary, and none of the others are. And that's what really tripped people off.
And it's, just seeing what happened with it. Anytime as a parent, you tell your kid to do something or not to do it, they're going to do it. So it helped us out.
Very true.
True.
And I think there was another community component to this too, with everything going on with COVID and restrictions being put in place, places being shut down. Having an open, free community barbecue meant a lot to rural communities, a lot.
It's true.
And it was a place that I think a lot of rural communities haven't seen the impacts maybe that we've seen in the urban areas of COVID, and have been really questioning the regulations. But at the same time, they were shut down from these kind of events throughout the year as well. And this was an opportunity. I don't know if we could ask for a more perfect day in March to have this statewide, but it was certainly a great opportunity for folks to get together in a safe manner outside and enjoy a burger with their neighbors.
I don't think, because I went to the one in Colorado City, that was for the Greenhorn Valley. And as I looked around, there was a whole lot of people I hadn't seen in over a year, a whole lot of people. And the affection and that was between everybody, and just getting to see everybody, and the FFA kids were just so great. And they served everybody, and they had their jackets on, and I had parents texting me, can you please send me pictures? And it was amazing. And I don't know that we'd all felt the love so much as we did that day. I thought it was precious.
It was really cool. I was down in Monte Vista at the co-op, and just to see everybody show up, again, all of the 4-H and FFA kids, they were serving food. It was like it was fair time again. Everybody was excited. The potato guys were there. The beef guys were there. Everyone just showed up full on ready to support. And like, we're still counting some of the impacts, but our last count was over $300,000 were raised for a bunch of different organizations.
Like what?
Whether that be 4-H and FFA youth groups. Alamosa County, they donated 1,000 pounds of beef to the La Puente homeless shelter.
Oh,
So it's just pretty incredible. Everybody came up, and not only did they celebrate together, but they pulled out their checkbooks and they just showed their love for each other. And
The location I was at in Southwest Colorado was raising money for their fire department. I mean, it was
really,
you think about all of these charities that we support throughout the year and in rural communities. It was another nod to some of those that didn't get to have the pancake breakfast and didn't get to have these kind of events throughout the year, and just trying to help them, keep their doors open and stay afloat.
It was a really cool way to take something that was negative and turn it into an unmitigated positive. And I mean, like Chad said, people wanted to get out. Everybody was happy. They were, supportive and positive events. It wasn't a protest, and it wasn't people tearing down, what was going on in Denver and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It was all really nice and supportive, and people were happy to see each other.
well, I'll tell you, one of my twins looked at me and he was asking about this, and we were sort of explaining why we were doing this. And he goes, so actually this really is a protest, right? And I go, actually, I guess it is kind of a protest. He goes, but the right way to do it, right? And I'm like, yes, the right way to do a protest. So let's talk a little bit about, and we've talked a lot with you guys already about this, but can we have a follow-up report on what's happening with wolf introduction into Colorado, where it really doesn't need to happen? I'll say it, you guys can't say it, but I'll say it. It doesn't really need to happen. But there's been some interesting things, again, with some counties. Rio Blanco County said that they were going to have a wolf introduction sanctuary, meaning they're not going to accept wolves into their, how is all that working now?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. And as Chad sort of alluded to, and as part of the broader context of most of the conversation that we're going to have here today, it's the litany of things that rural Colorado is facing that folks in Denver and in the Capitol and in the governor's office don't necessarily see in toto as something that's terribly bad for rural Colorado, but we see all the things lined up in a row. You follow that bouncing ball, things are not looking good, right? And wolf introduction is another one of those things. It was a terribly contentious campaign, and people who were in Western Colorado who were going to have to play host to these wolves now had their voice completely drowned out by people on the Front Range who are never going to have to deal with the consequences of introducing wolves. And people are pretty emotional about that. And the governor showed up to the first meeting of the Colorado Wildlife Commission and asked them to do this as fast as possible. We wanted wolves on the ground by the end of this year. So that tripped off a whole nother, round of folks in Western Colorado being upset. Probably not a very appropriate thing to ask for in hindsight. But to their credit, the Wildlife Commission listened to what their staff had told them about how this process has gone in other states, and said, no, we're not going to rush it. We're going to take all the time allowed to us by the statute and do this right so that folks who are going to be impacted by this are heard, and we use the best science available in order to make, as much lemonade out of the lemons we were given as possible. So to your question on where we are, the Colorado Wildlife Commission asked staff to move forward on their process. They've approved a plan in terms of how they're going to do the plan writing, essentially the plan for the plan. They're going to hold a number of meetings around the state to get voter feedback. They have a stakeholder committee that's made up of different groups of Coloradans who are going to come in and advise and try and come to some agreement on best practices for what the final program for wolf introduction will look like. They'll also have a technical committee made up of scientists and biologists and ecologists and the folks that know how to look at the data and crunch the numbers, figure out how many wolves, where they're going to be, what the management process is going to look like going forward. And so all of that will ultimately come together, and they'll come up with a plan here probably by the end of the next year or so. But there's a long way to go, and there's a lot of engagement that's going to have to take place between now and then.
Remind me where the wolves that they're going to displace into Colorado. Remind me where they're going to come from.
We don't know yet. They
Are
could
they
come
going to
from
trap them from someplace, or?
there's a bunch of different sources. It could be something along those lines from the Northern Rockies. We don't know yet. And that's one of the questions that Parks and Wildlife staff has and needs to figure out how they're going to answer. Also, how they're going to do that in a way that doesn't conflict and works alongside the federal process and federal wolf management programs, to the extent that that species is still under the jurisdiction of the Endangered Species Act.
So, so where is, and I hadn't even thought about the fact that they're endangered species in some places. So that's an interesting little wrinkle in all of that. And also, have they been able to track and really find out where the wolves that are already here are at? So they're not putting them in, and straining the wolf population that's already here?
Yeah, they're CPW staff is working on that a little bit more, trying to identify what the pack in Northwest Colorado looks like, and where they came from, how many there are, how many they can expect to continue going forward. We think that's a really important part of the process and should be fed into the planning, so that if the final plan says X number of wolves need to be introduced into the state of Colorado to have a viable population, that number can be reduced by the amount that are already here.
Right.
And more might range in over the next year and a half or so. They just found a wolf in the panhandle of Nebraska that's genetic markers go back to the Great Lakes wolf populations. So the things roam and they go all over the place, and we can expect that to happen more. And that should be a significant piece that's taken into consideration for the wolf management plan in Colorado going forward.
I was just going to ask that. Are the bordering states of Colorado, was there pushback from them? Are they pushing back now? How do they feel about this? Like Wyoming, I'm sure Wyoming doesn't want wolves to just magically appear in Wyoming.
On their border, yeah.
They're coming through Wyoming down from Yellowstone. That's where our population in Northwest Colorado has mainly come from. But to Chad's point, it's Eastern Utah. Those guys are very worried because they don't currently, to the best of our knowledge, have any ranging into that state. But now that you've got a significant new number being sort of airdropped into Colorado, it's completely, within the realm of the conceivable that they're going to range west into Utah as well, where frankly there's lower population density and there's much more appropriate habitat for them than most of the central mountain corridor, where there's condos and resorts and pipelines and transmission lines and factories and lots of homes and that sort of thing.
I think, and maybe just reading what some of the commissioners said in Rio Blanco County is, and I can't blame them for this view. In fact, I absolutely agree with them. The part that's really hard to swallow about all of this is a major thing that's going to happen, and the people who voted on it have nothing whatsoever to do about it. So basically what you're saying is, we're going to have somebody to vote on what's going to happen in my personal life that has never met me, has never lived my lifestyle, has never been even over to my part of the state. And they're the ones that get to decide how this all works, in spite of or in the face of what the science and the biologists are saying. So if it can happen here on this particular issue, what's preventing that from happening again on a different front? So I think that's what, so with the county.
You sort of touched on one of the broader and overall or, foundational problems with citizen petitions in the state of Colorado, and sort of the lax set of rules around them and what people can get on the ballot and what the content of the ballot initiatives say, right? There's no check on that sort of thing in our current process. And that's one of the problems with citizen petitions generally, is that they can do that. And it's ironically really undemocratic.
Well, and and I think you said it, Chad, in a different interview, is that there's no stakeholder input, there's no amendments, there's no way around it.
Right.
It's just is what it is. And as soon as the secretary certifies the title on it, we're on our way. And we'll get into pause in a minute, but I think that's the concern.
And that's one of the big things, like when the pause amendment that we'll talk about in a little bit, when that hit folks' radar, there was a lot of confusion because they think it's like legislation. There was blame to call the governor, call your legislator, have them fix this. Well, once a initiative gets fairly early into the process, there's not even an opportunity for the proponents to rewrite it. even if they wanted to, if they saw that there was a problem.
Have to start from the beginning if
Yeah.
they want to.
So they have to, they would have to pull the initiative, throw out all the work that they've done and start over. So that, and I think that's why we see a lot of these initiatives that are not thoroughly thought out from end to end in Colorado.
So who on the wolves, who was paying for that initiative? I know that Colorado Farm Bureau put a lot of money and effort into fighting that. I know you guys worked really, really hard and you tried to get in front of it from the very beginning. But a lot of the money that was supporting the initiative to begin with, was that Colorado money? Was that Colorado citizens or was that somebody else?
Some from Colorado, but mainly New York, Washington, D.C., and California.
Yeah.
So
There was a group, the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, that was kind of put together, but a lot of that funding, it comes from other places.
So
Sierra
from other
Club,
states, yeah,
others.
Sierra Club, other states that have nothing whatsoever to do with how Coloradans live right now.
Mhm.
Right.
One more question, and I think it was interesting. It was pretty bold for the Rio Blanco County Commissioners to say that this is going to be a sanctuary. How effective is that declaration going to be?
I think that's the question.
Yeah, I think that's the question. I think it's a resolution, and so in terms of how much that's legally binding, I think that's fairly questionable. We'll see what happens. I mean, it sends a message that's a good thing, but it's rock in a hard place. You've got Colorado Parks and Wildlife who have a statutory requirement to do this,
Right.
and then you've got counties saying no, you can't. So we'll see what happens.
So the state will win out in the end on that. So,
But it still sends a message. That's the
Yeah.
important thing.
Yep.
that it sends a message that this is not what we want. This is not what's going to work for us. And I guess you better do a darn good job on answering all the questions that we already put up. If there's a message on either Meat In, Meat Out that you hope to get out, or also on wolves in the last couple minutes we have.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about Meat In and sort of all the conversations we're having about urban Colorado, understanding what our rural friends and communities are doing. It's just that this is a great week. It's Ag Week. It was a great culmination of understanding what the second largest industry, the impacts that agriculture has on the entire state, and sort of the corners of everybody's daily lives that it touches, whether it's fueling everybody's plates or contributing tax dollars or having agribusiness and restaurants be able to survive. And I think it was a good opportunity to bring everybody together, and hopefully we can carry that momentum and that energy into all of the other conversations we have, and remember that we're neighbors and communities, and we're all in this together.
It certainly got the governor's attention too. And, he had to share his secret brisket recipe with everyone. I haven't tried it yet, but, it got him to show support for the industry as well.
It's been interesting in that, over the past few years, at least, the tie between rural and urban areas has been fraying a little bit. But in the past, there's always been recognition that urban Colorado needs rural Colorado just as much as rural Colorado needs urban Colorado. And Governor Hickenlooper was one who actually talked about that fairly frequently, and brought that theme up quite a bit. And I think the fact that he sort of led on that and talked about it at least helped a lot in sort of bridging that divide. And it's clear that we don't always have that message being sent currently. And that's why you get things like Meat In and Meat Out, and the extent that we had support from folks and saw as much participation in urban and suburban areas in Colorado for Meat In shows that tie is still there. We just have to work to cultivate it.
So my favorite thing about this last few weeks and the month is one of the things that ag is really, really not good about is tooting your own horn. You guys are not good about saying, here's what we do. You guys are too busy working. I get it. But I've always thought that the general public should understand better how close all the tech that's involved, all the practices and how they've been updated over the years, how you guys have actually used science in a lot of ways to produce food, all of those great things that you guys have done that you just don't talk about. Maybe my favorite thing in the last couple of years has been that you guys actually have, or the last few weeks, is that's actually come to the forefront in a way that has not happened in a really long time as I see it.
Yeah, and it's important, and I try to point it out as much as possible, that whenever you're talking ag, you know, what's one of the most important issues on voters' minds in Colorado? They always go back to climate change and environmental stewardism. And I always point out that you'll never find a better environmentalist than an ag producer or a farmer, because you have to take care of the land, because that's your livelihood, your life, your living. And I think that can't be said enough. And I really try to get that message out. And with Action 22, we're trying to get that message out more and more, because, you know, you talk to somebody that's never traveled outside of Denver, you know, they don't know. There was the reporter that was flying on the airplane, and he saw the farms, and he had never seen farms. He's like, what are those little circles down there? If you remember that, you know. So it's important to get that message out and make people aware of what you actually do and how important it is to Colorado. And
yeah. All right, we're going to come back in a minute after a little bit of a break, and we're going to talk about pause, but all the other legislation that's you guys are working on right now. It feels like every day there's something new during this session that has specifically to do with ag. We'll talk about that and a few other things right back after these messages. Hi, welcome back to Making Action Happen. We are sitting at the Colorado Farm Bureau office in Denver with some of my very favorite people. We've got Chad Borthman, who is Executive VP for Colorado Farm Bureau. He's also on the Action 22 executive team. We've also got Sean Martini and Taylor, what's her name, with us.
Salami.
That's my favorite one yet.
We'll never forget old what's her name. So the most enraging thing, and this isn't a pretty enraging session, but the most enraging thing that I've seen in a really long time is this Initiative 16 called Pause, but it would effectively make animal husbandry illegal, a crime in Colorado. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but before we dive in too deep, I'm just going to say that the people who initiated this initiative must hate Coloradans. That's the only thing I can think. They just must absolutely hate Coloradans. I don't know how anybody justifies in their minds to make animal husbandry a crime. And so you guys have been dealing with this already. You guys have had a lot of interviews about this. Just say what you think about this. I'll say what I think, but you guys say what you think about what's going on, where this is at, and what we do next about this.
So this is without a doubt. I've been in Colorado 20 years, but I think in the history of our ballot initiative process, this is probably the worst ballot initiative that's ever been filed. Certainly our people see it as that. It's going to criminalize farmers, ranchers, veterinarians for doing common practices that we've done for generations in breeding livestock and improving the genetics of our herd. It changes some statutory language to define common animal care practices as cruelty to animals. It just really oversteps the bounds in a lot of areas and should be a signal to the greater population of Colorado that maybe our ballot initiative process that we love so much, that we love access to that ballot, maybe it needs to be relooked at someday. We as an organization have been watching this along with the other livestock groups from the day it dropped and been following it very closely. But kind of like the Meat In, Meat Out day, that cauldron in rural Colorado was boiling. And when Title Board accepted the initiative last Wednesday, set the title and at that point declared it was single subject, we saw an eruption, really not only in Colorado, but nationally. All of our phones been ringing off the hook with others around the nation going, what is going on in Colorado? Since then, we've kind of seen some of these similar issues pop up. There's an initiative in Oregon. There's an animal welfare initiative down in Arizona. So we're kind of starting to piece together parts of the puzzle going, maybe this is more of a concerted effort to make some kind of odd statement that I don't fully understand.
So give us some details. If you haven't read or you don't know about this pause and you're feeling a little bit of passion here with all of us who are advocates for ag around give us some details about what is actually included in this.
Sure. So two big things. One, it essentially bans the harvesting of livestock in the state of Colorado, and it does that by mandating that you are guilty of animal cruelty if you slaughter an animal if it hasn't lived up to 25% of its expected lifespan. And then they go ahead and list expected lifespans for different species. So what that means is, you know, the average age for harvest for a fat steer to go into the meat supply chain is 18 months or so. The initiative would require that they have to be 5 years old or older. Nobody wants to eat a 5-year-old steer, right? So it essentially shuts down beef processing and livestock processing in the state of Colorado.
In one part that's important to note about that is, in order to be in the export market, we're exporting beef that's under 30 months of age.
Right.
By law,
So,
by international treaty. Yeah.
International treaty under law. So it effectively kills $1 billion industry in Colorado, just our export.
Just
market.
on exports alone.
Just on that.
Yep. And overall, the livestock processing supply chain in the state is somewhere between $5 and $7 billion just on its own. So that gets shut down and leaves, and probably, you know, tens of thousands of jobs at least associated with that kind of a thing. The second big thing that it does is it essentially makes veterinarians, farmers, ranchers, anybody who's caring for livestock guilty of, quote, sexual contact with animals if they engage in standard veterinary animal care practices that we do on farms and ranches all the time and have done for decades.
So I have a question about that. I read through several times, I've read through the initiative.
Mhm.
And the proponents of the initiative say that this isn't true, but I don't see by the language how it delineates this. So this would effectively prevent you from neutering or spaying your dogs and cats, your pets. There's no difference, right? They say they list animals, anything domesticated, including fish, by the way, which I thought was, again, another step in the direction of insanity, to have fish as domestic. I mean, goldfish, okay, but then they say that you can't do that with livestock, but you can't do that with livestock, but you can do that with dogs and cats. Did you read that the same way?
This is another one of the problems with citizen initiatives that Chad alluded to and we've talked to, right? What they say they're trying to do and what the text that they've written up is actually going to do are always two different things. And in this case, the language in this is really squirrely and it could be interpreted in lots of different ways. And ultimately, should it pass, that's going to be up to a court and up to regulatory agencies to try and figure out what those rules are and divine what voters wanted. Again, I don't think this is going to pass. This is so crazy, but should it pass, that's what the effect would be.
But none of us thought that logically wolves would pass either.
This is the concern.
We didn't.
I mean, this is a concern. I mean, and this is why, you know, not only nonprofit associations like the Farm Bureau and the Cattlemen's Association and the Livestock Association, egg producers and dairy producers alike are going to have to step up and push back on this campaign. Agribusiness is really going to have to be supportive in a real way. The business community is really going to have to be supportive in a real way. We're ready to mount this campaign and have this fight, but we can't afford to do it by ourselves. And if nothing is done, it'll pass.
Yeah. It will pass.
So in it, and I read through it, I didn't get into all the details, but you mentioned fish. Are fish included in the slaughter of the fish for food that has to live 25% of its life?
I can't remember if they outlined a lifespan for fish or not.
In the initiative, it just adds them as being livestock now.
Sure.
And then all of the exemptions for normal husbandry practices, veterinary practices, they're not exempt from animal cruelty anymore. You know, if you're doing everything that you can to raise an animal the best you can, it can still be considered cruelty. So it certainly steps over a lot of barriers and a lot of bounds.
So when they reintroduce the wolves, how are they going to breed them then if this passes?
Well, tiger story.
You want me to go get my two?
No, it's
Well, yeah, there was a tiger. We saw that tiger in the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo
Mhm.
a couple weeks ago that died under sedation. But they were trying to, a female tiger, they were trying to artificially inseminate. Are those people felons? Are those people criminals?
Yeah,
They would be under this.
They would be.
are they coming into sexual contact with an animal? No.
No.
I mean that's what this initiative would have it be in the eyes of the law if it were to pass.
Who's pushing this? Who's behind this?
A couple of guys from Boulder. Several they're associated with animal rights organizations. One of them is associated with PETA. So it's not unreasonable to assume those kinds of organizations are helping them in drafting this and getting through the process and put it in front of voters.
has there been anything like this anywhere else in the country?
Not that we're aware of.
No.
The only other filed initiative that we've seen is the Oregon one that kind of goes at these similar statutes for sexual abuse and those kind of things.
Okay, so if you would help me walk through this whole process that we're talking about, because we have a lot of listeners out of the state of Colorado, and I'm not entirely sure that even a lot of folks in the state of Colorado understand our ballot initiative process here and how it goes and how something like this could be introduced and actually put on a ballot. So can you kind of walk us through how that goes and then where it's at right now?
Yeah, it might be a really foreign process to folks that you have from out of state, even folks who aren't in the West, because citizen initiatives, citizen ballot initiatives are very much a feature of the Western states, not so much back East. So it might be completely foreign to people from back there for sure, but it's a problem here in Colorado and a number of neighboring states. Arizona, Oregon, Missouri has a fairly lax process for
California.
citizen initiatives to the ballot. California is one of them as well. But Chad can take you through the process. We do a lot of education on this because when these things pop up, you're right, people don't know, and it's a weird process and it's counterintuitive in terms of how it operates.
And the bottom line is it's very much set up for citizens to have access to their ballot, to their government, to change things on their own if they don't feel the elected representatives are doing this for them. I think where it misses a step is there really is no process for it to be improved substantially along the way. But it starts with an idea, you scratch it down on the back of a bar napkin and get it submitted to the Secretary of State. Once that's done, then the process is really kind of on a little bit of a roller coaster heading forward. You meet with the legislative and legal services, that's the nonpartisan attorneys that work for the legislature. They're the ones that help the legislators draft bills and get things in correct legal language. But the proponents get to meet with them and they'll ask a series of questions about the initiative that you want to put forward. But we could put forward an initiative that said, we want to introduce unicorns in Pueblo, Colorado, and Pueblo only, right?
And Leg Council would help them put that into legal language and then have it move along in the process.
And there's nothing that they can do to stop it. There is no way at any point to challenge the merit or constitutionality of any initiative. So after Legislative Council, that's really the meeting with Legislative Council, that's the last opportunity the proponents have to change the language in what gets submitted through the process. They can edit it. They can take the Council of Legislative and Legal Services and that says, hey, you should put this word here or that word there. You should use this type of terminology. But then once it's done with that process, it goes to Title Board, and Title Board has two jobs. One is to determine, is this single subject? So in Colorado, we do have a law that everything that gets put on the ballot from a citizen's initiative standpoint has to be single subject. So a voter can't look at an initiative and say, well, I like that, but I don't like this.
Right.
So the other thing it has to be is yes or no. So it has to be very clear, but so Title Board decides single subject. The second thing that they do is they set the title, and that is, shall the citizens of Colorado, yada, 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 and then yes means yes, no means no. they set those two things to be clear, easy to understand language, common vernacular. Don't use charged messages, charged words that might stimulate a voter to vote one way or another. That's the process that we were at last Wednesday. Yesterday, our organization, Colorado Farm Bureau, and five additional livestock groups filed a petition for rehearing because a couple things. Two, we don't believe that it is single subject. It contains several different areas of law. It's talking about changing criminal code. It talks about sexual contact with animals. It's things that aren't related. That's the, changing when you can harvest an animal, when you can slaughter an animal. Changing all of those things we feel are different subjects that voters should be able to at least evaluate on their own if the initiative was that way. The other thing we really want the title board to relook at the language that's in there. We think some of the words that they use are emotionally charged. We think some of the words are confusing to the average voter. I'll give you an example. A lot of us grew up in rural, that are on this podcast now. We grew up in rural communities. We know what animal husbandry means.
Yes.
I think if you talk to Joe on the street, do they know what animal husbandry means as a term? And it is something that we use in legalese. We use it in statute now, but it has a clear definition there. So that's what the job is going to be of title board going forward, is to go through that rehearing, look at our arguments, and ultimately decide, is this single subject? If they say no, we agree with you, this has multiple subjects, thank you for pointing that out, they'll kick it out. And the proponents have to go back to the drawing board.
So that was going to be my next question. If they kick it out, the proponents can always go back and take out a few things but reintroduce this to the title board under slightly different things. So they can change it. How long do they have to tweak it before they run out of time?
So they could probably submit a ballot initiative. Anyone could submit a ballot initiative until probably sometime in April next year. This ballot initiative and many others that are being heard by title board now are aimed at the 2022 ballot.
Okay.
We have different restrictions, and I don't remember what they all are as to what can go on in odd years versus even years. But they're aimed at 2022. But really, once you get closer to that April of 2022 timeline, you're getting close enough to the election and the timeline that leads up to printing ballots that it really shortens the window for proponents to go out and collect signatures.
So this is going to be a fight for the next year, at least.
It certainly could be if they want to keep coming back and pecking at it, or if this initiative moves forward. After the rehearing, we have, as opponents, have an opportunity to petition the Supreme Court to look at our same arguments and whether they make sense. And Supreme Court has the same opportunity to either kick it back to title board to change language and say, no, the opponents have a point, or they could kick it out on single subject as well.
So if they at any time, can the proponents of the initiative yank the initiative?
They can.
Can they yank it at any time?
Yep. At any time, really.
Up until ballots are printed.
Up until ballots are printed. The proponents can say, yeah, we're not going to go forward with this.
How much does this cost?
Well,
let's see. So that's the crazy part right here. Everything that I've told you that the proponents have done hasn't necessarily had to cost them a dime.
Okay.
Certainly, if you're going to bring a citizens initiative forward, you should probably have some kind of legal counsel, some kind of legal guidance as to what you're doing beyond legislative and legal services. I certainly appreciate those people, but it's not their job to write it for the proponents.
Right.
But really, like, if you and I want to bring forward an initiative, they're going to help us do it. And to this point, could be absolutely free. I think it's when you get into more of the legal challenges that we start to see, are these guys really serious about this, or are they not? When it comes to gathering signatures for petitions. Are they serious about this or are they not? There's a whole cottage industry that's in Colorado that doesn't exist in many states, where people have petition gatherers that go down the 16th Street Mall. They stand in front of every King Soopers and City Market in every
And they pay
metropolitan
them
area.
to do that.
And they get
per
paid
signature.
per signature to gather signatures.
And so because they pay them per signature, those guys can get pretty aggressive.
Yes.
Certainly.
Yeah, it's a whole industry. I could talk for an hour on gathering
Well,
signatures
I
of
know.
how much it costs. So if it gets to the point where they have to gather the signatures, how many do they have to have and where do the signatures come from?
So this is a statutory amendment. So in Colorado, we have two levels. We have the constitutional amendment, statutory. Constitutional amendments require 2% of registered voters in each state Senate district. So you have to get representation from all of Colorado for a constitutional amendment. This is a statutory amendment though. So this is just like the legislature passing a law. This requires, 5% of the voters who voted in the last general election for Secretary of State, for all candidates for Secretary of State. So that number ends up being somewhere around 125,000 plus or minus 600-700. So they need 125,000 valid signatures.
And those could come from anywhere. It's not.
And those can come
Correct.
from anywhere in Colorado as long
you
as
go.
they're registered voters. And you think about it that, well, yeah, that's still a good bar to go across, but think about what we've done the last 20 years. Rock the vote and all the, encouraging people to sign up and making it so easy to become a registered voter. Whether people are voting and participating in the process or not, the amount of registered voters across Colorado and really across America is going up every single year, right? So it does create a path that's easier for initiatives like this to get on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know this is a very basic question for you, but I think it's interesting. Can you just do a signature online and that counts? Or does it have to be in person? Because I think there's a whole lot of people who believe that they'll get an email and it says, hey, sign on to this. We need your signature for this. And they'll do it online. And that's not a real thing.
Yeah.
You have to actually be in person and physically do that. But 125,000 is not a lot of signatures.
No,
And it's 125,000 valid signatures.
Yeah.
So one of the nice things about that is that generally means that with the average rejection rate that you can anticipate when the Secretary of State goes through and starts looking and validating the signatures, they've actually got to get closer to 180 or 190,000 in order to have a higher confidence level that when those signatures are checked, they'll actually cross that threshold for the number of valid signatures that's required.
very difficult to get without professional help.
Exactly.
In most cases.
And that's why that industry is there. Those folks know how to get them signed properly, and so that every signature they get counts as much as it possibly can.
How much do you know how much they have to spend on getting those signatures, that cottage industry? Do you know?
Roughly, maybe if you wanted to get, say, 50,000 signatures, you're going to spend at least $65,000. So it's just under $1 signature is what the going rate is. Now, this may be a bit different because the criteria for the signature is different than just anybody signing it. So, it might be $2 a signature is what the cost is.
So basically what you're going to spend.
Yeah,
It can float around. The market moves around
Yeah.
based on demand and
Yeah.
how many petition gatherers they are able to put into the field and that kind of thing. I mean, it can cost. It took about $1.2 million to get Prop 114 on the ballot last go around. So there's significant sums there.
And as we
Yeah.
get closer to 2022 and the election and things start making the ballot or getting their petitions out, then we see the other side, the anti-initiatives, kind of some famous ones that come to mind is last time we got to vote on transportation. There was 2 different choices from 2 different groups with 2 different visions. And both of them ultimately failed because they kind of were there to, in some circumstances, drag each other down. So that's unfortunate when we have needed infrastructure that we need funding. But At the same time, those are the things that we see. And then we see that signature collectors, you know, going as high as $10, $11, $12 a signature, because there is so much just demand for signatures. People want to get on the ballot with competing measures.
Yeah.
This is all incredibly insane. So I remember this last election, was it the most ballot or most items on a ballot ever in the history of Colorado? Or was that the time before? It was either the first or the second. It was either this first or second. So I think there was on one.
13 questions.
It was
I think.
13.
I will say this. I don't know if it was the most, but when you look at what we were voting on last time, it was all over the board.
Yeah.
Yes.
It had to be the most subjects that we had ever voted on. You're voting on whether or not we should be able to vote to raise fees. We were voting on lowering the income tax. We were voting on wolves. We were voting
Abortion limits.
abortion limits. Like, it was all over the board.
All right. So we're out of time right now. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate it so much. We're going to support you. Action 22 is going to support you on your fight against pause. And our entire board is behind you on that one. So Chad Forthman, I know you're listening because you're sitting right across from me for the first time ever. And all the things they say when the stalker meets the stalky is totally not true. I can tell you that right now. Join us next week when I ask a lot more overly complicated questions, and Brian finally reveals his stage name for when he was touring with a metal band and a punk band at the same time. We'll see you next week.